Hi, this is Grover with Blue Collar Codes, the quick and dirty. I'm going to go over an aside that's just going over the basic syntax of Python and some of the basic concepts that I didn't include in the beginner series that one might want to look into just to understand a little bit of how Python needs to be formatted. So if you wish to follow along, you can find a link to this file in the GitHub repository. There's a link in the video summary. So aside, bare basics. So the first few things I want to show are just to make a comment, you use the pound symbol, and then it's every single line. If you want to have a multi-line comment, you use the triple quotes. And these are just ignored during runtime. So when you press run, it's not doing anything with this information. A few things to note are just how Python's core syntax differs from other languages. So largely it relies upon indentation to outline which code belongs under which element. So I've summarized here for you the keywords that require indentation afterwards, meaning that code belongs to this, underneath this, and will run underneath that exception. And then you have a try block as well as while, for, else, elif, if, and then function definition. Class would be another one. So if you wanted to create classes. So to kind of just show you right off the bat, you can notice here that a lot of stuff is done by indentation. You create a function definition here, and then all the code that belongs to this definition, that will run and execute when you call this, is indented here. And in VS Code, at least, you can see that everything that belongs to this main def is this solid white line, and it goes all the way to the end before you have a space and then another definition of a different function. So everything else belongs to that inside. And you'll also notice if you do start nesting function definitions, and I'm not saying this is best practices, but just here to showcase. Now you can see that this function definition also has indentation here, and this solid line is showing you what belongs to this my function. And again, just a few more examples of how the indentation works. So this print belongs to this try block. This print belongs to this except and requires indentation. If you don't want to have anything there, you have to put pass. The same thing for here, pass. So that's another core use of the pass, is if you were creating kind of a skeleton and you don't yet know exactly what you want to have run. After an exception, you can put pass there, but you want to catch it. And then the same goes for these conditional statements. Just notice the indentation, and then all of these keyword statements also end in colon. So one thing I didn't mention earlier was they all have a colon at the end of them. That's kind of saying this is the end of the definition block. So keyword def, that's going to be the name in the namespace for your function, and then you have a colon there, and then all the code underneath it belongs to that main def. So how it differentiates from other code, that I'll just briefly show you one other example here, and that being index.js. So this is a Node Express website I was building at one point. And the thing that you should note right off the bat are all of the curly braces. So basically I'm using app, which is just an Express or a version of Express app that just handles your routes. And so when you go to the training page, it's going to get this, and then it's going to run this code. And you have to enclose that code not only in a curly braces, but also in parentheses. And then you have to end all of that with an end of line character. So it might look clean right here, but if you ever started having to nest things, which, is frowned upon, but look at this, the trailing amount of, like, what does this belong to, right? Where's the closing one? So if you ended up mixing things up, I've definitely spent some time being like, oh man, where is the open one that doesn't have a closing one? So that's one of the key differences that I wanted to show you, and that's why they say that Python's very readable, in that you don't have to have all of these enclosing things. It just relies solely on indentation to understand what belongs to what, what is running with what. Where here, instead of just indenting here to say that this is in the try block, you have to put these curly braces around it. And then for the catch, you have to put curly braces around it. As you can see, it can start getting kind of cumbersome. And that's one of the core differences that I wanted to show you. So outside of that, going over some of the basics of the programming, kind of rewinding a bit. If you're totally unfamiliar with how code runs, it's basically just reading a text file from upper left corner, kind of like how you're reading a book, at least in the Western world, to the bottom right corner. And so it's processing line by line, and it's looking for certain keywords or certain operators or certain symbols, which then dictate how it should handle the rest of the line. So what that means is that it is just looking line by line until it say it finds a definition, until it finds an if, and then it needs to have a conditional statement. Either it needs to be formatted with, greater than, less than, and two variables, or a list or some element has to be there, and then a colon, and then that's how it recognizes that it's an if statement. And then the same thing for all these other keywords, and then the same thing for the built-ins. It's going like, okay, it's reading this, and then it'll go down here and it'll read this, and it's waiting to find one of those words. For instance here, so you have def. So when it gets down to processing this line of code, it'll note, okay, I have a def. So then it triggers, and then it needs a name with then parentheses here in the absolute minimum, right? And then a colon. And then now it says, okay, those requirements have been satisfied. Now it's going to go to the next and start trying to figure out, so what is this function going to be doing? So then you have assignment, variable assignment with the equal sign, and then another function definition, the try, it'll find the keyword, and then the colon, and then it'll run this code. And if it catches an error, it'll see if it is accepted in here. But basically, it's just run like any kind of a text editor. It's just looking for certain things, certain keywords, built-in functions, so like int, and then it has certain requirements that need to be fulfilled. So the last thing that I'm going to go over here, I feel like that covers like the absolute basics of how Python works, in that how the code needs to be formatted. And go over this file too if you need to see how these different things need to be formatted, or with a syntax for basic if, elif, else, or for loops, while loops, and all of that. The last thing to say though would be, when you're running a file like this, not in the interactive prompt, not imported, if you want to run just the contents of this file, then you need to do if, and then this line of code here. So if the name equals main, then it'll run this code. And we'll get more into why that is later on, once we go over more in-depth class concepts, because that's when you start to understand how everything starts to get built and put together in this code. Again, this is Grover, Blue Collar Codes, just going over some of the basics. Let me know what you think. Thanks for joining.